Ulas, Ulis rather, Yildrim. So Uli is currently a residing fellow at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, while also staff officer for strategy and concepts role in the newly established Defence Space Command. In the work to be presented, Uli has the relevant role of Chief Engineer of the Joint Fuels and Lubricants Arm and is responsible for overseeing the technical integrity of the Defence Force's entire fuel and lubricants supply chains, I think. Uli is going to talk to us about the use of alternative fuels, which of course hydrogen plays a part, I have to say that. But I'll hand over to you, Uli.
Thanks, Patrick. Good morning, ladies and gents. I'm Winkamana Yildrim. It's a pleasure to be here at such a great venue to make a presentation on the work that the Jericho Disrupted Innovation team, in collaboration with CSIRO, have been undertaking over the last few months to develop a modular deployable kit capable of producing drop-in jet fuels from various feedstock. So allow me to give you a bit of background for context, and then we'll talk a little bit on the project itself. So Australia has a liquid energy deficit. In 2017 and 18, approximately 60% of Australia's liquid energy consumption was met by imports, while yesterday John Blackburn mentioned that that figure had risen to 90%. While there is an argument that Australia's supply routes are diverse and flexible, COVID-19 has shown the impacts of such dependence on imports, whose effects continue to reverberate through general society. The closure of Australian refineries, now down to 2, further exacerbated this over-reliance in refined product imports. The Ukraine crisis continues to highlight the effects of external shocks on the price of oil, and finally, the effects of climate change are an ever-present threat on the globe requiring decisive action. These challenges associated with liquid energy security, oil price fluctuations, and a rising emissions footprint are a direct consequence to the ADF's ability to raise, train, sustain, and project the forces to create the necessary effects, requiring a degree of self-reliance and sufficiency in case of emergencies. In this context, there is an immediate need in implementing measures to meet the ADF's growing jet fuel demands through the development of a resilient and distributed network capable of operating on alternative jet fuels from indigenous feedstock. However, these challenges are not new. Sustainability in aviation has been a concern since the first jet engine took flight in 1939. Since the first flight of a turbojet-powered aircraft, the recurring cycle of engine evolution followed better fuel performance has created deep-rooted conservatism and dependence on fossil fuels and by aircraft and engine manufacturers. The fuel crisis of the 1970s raised questions about the validity of this dependence on oil supplies while adding volatility in the cost of fuel to the mix. Between 1972 and 1985, the price of oil per barrel fluctuated from under $20 to over $120, down to below $20 again. And only a couple of weeks ago, you would have experienced that it went from $80 to above $130 per barrel, down below $90 again within a matter of days. Historically, to counter such concerns about energy security and fuel price volatility, countries such as the US supplemented their conventional jet fuel reserves with fuels produced from coal, tar sands, and shale oil. Large military operators also transitioned in response to the same concerns. In 1979, the entire US Air Force moved from JP4, which is a blend of kerosene and gasoline, which was specifically made for military, to JP8, which is a commercial aviation fuel containing military additives for protection against corrosion, static buildup, and icing. More recently, challenges associated with greenhouse effects due to fossil fuel use have been in focus. Based on trends prior to COVID-19, commercial aviation's contribution to global emissions was estimated to be between 2% and 3%. However, that figure is misleading because that emission is actually released at altitude, which is more severe. Before COVID, the aviation industry's emissions were increasing, with overall fuel consumption expected to grow by 38% between 2008 and 2025. So that trend kind of got a bit of a tick from COVID, but it is still growing, and it will continue to grow. In the face of these challenges, the aviation sector has sought to use drop-in alternative fuels that are suitable for existing aircraft. Investment in drop-in alternative jet fuels is mainly due to the time and cost involved in engine and aircraft design and development. These fuels are interchangeable with conventional fuels with no degradation in performance or safety and don't require any engine or airframe modifications. Let me give you some scientific background to elaborate on drop-in jet fuels, which tends to excite engineers. Not so exciting, but it is the crux of the problem we're dealing here. Drop-in alternative fuels are divided into two broad categories. The first includes synthetic jet fuels produced from coal, natural gas, and other hydrocarbons. The second includes biojet fuels produced from biological matter such as plant oils and animal fats. Synthetic jet fuels can be produced through the gasification of organic matter, the results of which are further synthesized through a process called the Fischer-Tropsch process. Biojet fuels are produced through the hydroprocessing of biological matter, which is a process of removing chemically bound oxygen to bring it down to the kerosene or jet fuel boiling range. Synthetic jet fuels and biojet fuels burn much cleaner than their traditional counterparts, leading to lower greenhouse gas emissions. However, some synthetic jet fuel production methods are emissions intensive. For instance, the production of jet fuels from the gasification of coal is highly heat intensive, which removes the benefits we gain by burning it. In contrast, the entire emissions life cycle of biojet fuels from production to consumption is much better than both conventional and synthetic fuels, making them attractive from an emissions and sustainability perspective. For instance, biojet produced from camelina reportedly delivered a 70% savings in life cycle emissions compared to conventional jet fuel. Notwithstanding all those positives, the establishment of industrial-scale alternative fuel production facilities has traditionally been deemed uncompetitive and hasn't been widely pursued. So a 2013 study between Qantas and the Australian Renewable Energy Agency estimated that a reference facility capable of producing 20,000 barrels a day of sustainable aviation fuel from natural oils would cost approximately $1 billion. From the same study, a pilot plant to produce another alternative fuel was estimated to be approximately $450 million. Accordingly, there's been a clear absence of subsidies and seed investment for such ventures in Australia. Over the past few years, this situation was exacerbated by a glut of fossil fuels that saw the price of oil drop to record lows. Hence, the aviation sector has continued to rely on fossil fuels with the knowledge that it is still at the whim of cartels, oil cartels, and constantly exposed to external shocks. And the Ukraine crisis clearly brought that to people's minds over the last few weeks, with the price of, as I mentioned, oil going above $130 and dropping again. The good news is that factors such as technological maturity and cheaper renewables have started to accelerate the transition of large portions of the market towards renewable fuels, such as hydrogen, as mentioned earlier. A 2020 study conducted by CSIRO and Boeing suggests that due to their energy per volume, sustainable aviation fuels produced from hydrogen will be the fuel of choice for medium to long-haul flights out to 2050. There is ongoing debate on how to tackle these problems. My suggestion is that with new technologies coming online, the aviation industry, including defense aviation, will need to revisit their investment strategies if they want to gain access to renewables in the future. Which brings me to the work Jericho Disrupt Innovation and CSIRO have been conducting in the past few months. In the absence of large production facilities, we've been working to develop a deployable modular kit to establish a resilient and distributed network capable of operating on alternative jet fuels, as I mentioned, from indigenous feedstock. This may include coal, natural gas, and all those feedstocks that I mentioned in the short term, with the intent to adopt sustainable feedstock in the long term, or medium term, I should say. This work was initially proposed by CSIRO in 2014, but disappointingly, it was not pursued at the time and not progressed beyond funding approval. We decided to restart the project because we felt that the development of modular kits can create a resilient and distributed network capable of operating on alternative fuels. This will reduce the ADF's exposure to shocks associated with liquid fuel import shortages in the event of a crisis. with large-scale fuel production can't be achieved by single players in silos, this project can assure the defence resilience and enable it to continue to operate for short periods, including for deployed operations until more permanent logistics tails can be established during operations. To prevent some of the issues that we've experienced concerning alternative fuels uptake, we divided the current work into two categories. The first category is looking at options to deal with immediate situations of looking at currently available approved feedstock and technologies to build this kit, so miniaturization of large facilities to small size where we can deploy this stuff. While the second category looks at longer-term options where defense and industry need to continue to provide seed funding, so not face what we faced in 2014, for emergent technologies, for instance, the use of hydrogen and direct air capture methods such that adaptation and uptake are smoother in the long run. In a recent post for the Australian Strategic Policy Institute strategist post, I mentioned that one plausible future in the 2050 period includes the production of electrofuels, which use electricity from renewable sources such as from solar power and combine them with green hydrogen and CO2 to produce sustainable aviation fuels at the point of delivery. We feel that when operational, this deployable kit can provide a similar resilient distribution within the next 24 months. Ladies and gents, this ends my presentation. I will now stop and allow for questions and then get Mr. James Deverill from CSIRO to provide a bit more detail on the work that we've been doing so far. Thank you. Yeah, look, I'll just repeat what Paul Muscat was saying for people online. During the journey, as we were looking at this modular kit, and as I mentioned, the miniaturization of technology, what we've discovered is that the technologies to be able to produce large volumes of alternative jet fuels are already available in Australia. And some of the figures, and don't quote me on this, but some of the figures we've found from some of the contractors was that they could produce 30 to 50 million litres a year if given the opportunity. But because of the lack of uptake from government and industry, because of the initial costs, meant that these people have not pursued these pathways. But if there were, and Bioenergy, I believe, mentioned a similar comment a few months ago, if there were uptake and there was seed funding for these opportunities, the uptake would be much higher from industry, but we haven't shown that interest yet. So I'll just read a question from Alistair McInerney. How do we determine which sustainable energy is best to use in our air bases to power our infrastructure if we have multiple energy options? H2, green electricity. Look, I don't have an answer for that question. The challenge I see is that the certification process that engine and aircraft manufacturers go through such a rigorous process that I would use that as a separate thing rather than comparing it to what we do on air bases for land vehicles or how to generate electricity at the base itself. But like I said, the electrofuels perspective or power to liquid perspective is meant to generate electricity from sustainable sources using solar panels and whatever else available there, and then use that energy to power the entire base and also produce alternative fuels as required. I believe I've just run out of time, so I'll stop there, but I'm happy to take questions afterwards. Thank you.